Secret Cutting, also known as Painful Secrets, is a film from 2000. It's directed by Norma Bailey, written by Dennis Nemec, based on the novel by Stephen Levenkron, and it stars Kimberlee Peterson as Dawn. We also have Rhea Perlman as Dr. Parella, and it's because of Rhea Perlman that I decided to watch it. Honestly, I probably wouldn't have watched it otherwise, and part of me kind of regrets watching it. Not because it's a bad film necessarily, but because it's exceptionally triggering, and I want to talk about this now so that if it is something that you might find triggering, you don't need to listen to me talking about it if you want to decide early on it's not going to be for you. But there won't be any spoilers in this. I won't say what happens at the end or anything. But Dawn is a 16-year-old and she self-harms. And I will say that's always such an important topic to address. And in a lot of ways, the film did a lot of right things. But I think one very bad decision was made. Because we see the cuts. We see the cuts when they're fresh. And maybe they were going for the shock factor. But if this is the kind of thing you find triggering, those moments are exceptionally triggering. And I think, yes, they were showing the cuts to make it powerful. And maybe if you've never experienced what Dawn is doing, then it might not be triggering and it might just be shocking. But I feel like the people who will benefit most from this film, well, there are two categories of people. There are people who also self-harm, and then there are people who are friends and family of those who self-harm. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. But if you watch this, and you have that experience, I feel like it's going to be exceptionally challenging to watch. I felt sick throughout the entire thing. It is very, very triggering. If they didn't show the cuts up close, then I think it wouldn't have been as bad. It would have been a little bit, I don't know if it would have been less triggering, but it would have been easier to watch. So I think that was a terrible decision, because I feel like the people who can benefit most from this will be the people who are going to find it the most challenging to watch. And not challenging in a good way. There are some films that are difficult to watch, but they're completely worth it. I don't think this is the case. And if you're not in the right headspace just now, if you're going to find this very triggering, don't watch it. Please don't watch it. Don't go anywhere near it. If it wasn't for Rhea Perlman, I would have given up after the first maybe 20 minutes or so. I can't remember exactly when the first cut happens, but I wouldn't have continued. So please bear that in mind if you do decide to watch it. The rest of the film, or the film outside of seeing the cuts up close, it does a pretty good job. There are various things in Dawn's life that are, I guess, triggers for leading her to do this. And most of the film is about her trying to find a better way of doing this, and this is where Rhea Perlman's character comes into this. This is Dr. Parella, a therapist, and to Dawn's credit, she does at one point decide to talk to the therapist. And it's not a quick fix, and I think it does a very good job of showing that it's not going to just be something you can cure overnight, and I think that that's really important. I think anybody who decides to seek therapy for anything, really, I think laying out the expectations from the beginning is really important, and the film does a really good job of that. The other aspect of the film, and this is where I think it really triumphs, is the reactions of Dawn's family. Everybody has a different reaction to this. And her mother's just not a nice character. I just don't like her mother at all. She has a terrible attitude, not just with the cutting, but with other aspects of Dawn's life as well. And honestly, I hated her. I hated her completely. Dawn's father really made me emotional with some of the things he said. He has a much more, in my opinion, reasonable response to this. And he said something that I think was quite powerful. And I might get a little bit emotional when I share this. So this is, I guess, a tiny spoiler for something that her father says to her. It doesn't spoil the progression of the narrative, though. But he says to her, if you want to cut something, cut me. Because that's what it feels like every time you cut yourself. And that's never been said to me. I feel like if that's said to somebody who does this, that could be such a wake-up call, potentially, about the fact that it's not just themselves they're hurting. And obviously how they feel should be at the centre of this. But it is, I think, quite eye-opening if somebody says, actually, I care about you so much that when you hurt yourself, it hurts me too. And I feel like that was a bit of a turning point, not necessarily in the way Dawn behaved, but it felt like we were starting to take steps in a more positive direction. And I thought that was really powerful and very, very well done. Her brother, Dawn's brother, has an interesting response to it, and definitely something that made me think. I think that character in particular was quite interesting. And as I said, there are a lot of positives in this, such as encouraging people to seek therapy and perhaps giving an indication of what that might look like. Because if you've never had therapy, it might be difficult to visualize what that might be like. Dawn said at one point to her therapist, "You're not going to stop me from doing this." And her therapist made it quite clear that she can't stop her from doing anything. And that is true. If you see a therapist, a good therapist, for this kind of issue, it's not necessarily their job to argue with you and tell you to stop doing this. And I think maybe if you've never had therapy for this, that could be a concern. It could be a concern that they're going to take away that emotional outlet. And it's not necessarily the case. So I think the film did a really great job of helping show what it could be like, and maybe dispelling some myths about what therapy for cutting might actually be like. So definitely a lot of praise for it there, a lot of praise for the parents' reactions. The mother should stand as an example of what not to do and how not to be selfish in this kind of situation, because she was terrible. I hate her. I absolutely hate her. But it definitely helps to show that there are right and wrong ways of dealing with this kind of situation if you are the family member of somebody going through this. So a lot of praise for a lot of decisions made with this film, but I think showing the cuts up close was a terrible decision, not just because it makes me feel physically sick, but also because if you are watching it as somebody who has done that, it is very, very triggering. The idea alone is very triggering. Obviously, it'll be different for every person, but in general, just thinking about it, talking about it, listening to people talking about it is triggering. But then you show it up close, and that's so damaging. And if somebody is not quite in the right frame of mind, it is very difficult to look past that without absorbing how triggering it is. So I think they made a really terrible decision by basically making it an impossible watch for the people who would benefit from it most. And that's kind of a huge problem. Again, there will be people who can watch it no problem, but certainly that's not always going to be the case. So I think they kind of ruined what could have been an amazing motivational film for some people to try and get the help they need. But if you're the family member of somebody in Dawn's position, I think there's a tremendous amount of value in this film. So they made one horrendous decision, but everything else I think was very well done. Do I recommend it? Proceed with caution, depending on where you're coming at this from. I will never watch it again. And as I said, had it not been for Rhea Perlman and my desire to watch her in this, I wouldn't have continued. I would have given up pretty quickly. So it's not for everybody. I don't think it's suitable for anybody in a certain headspace. But if you're looking at this for education about what it might be like to be in Dawn's position, for examples of how not to behave if you are in a family or you're a friend of somebody in Dawn's situation, then sure, yeah, I think there's a lot of value. Secret cutting or painful secrets is not perfect by far. I think they made some very poor decisions, but in general, I still think there's a lot of value to the film.